On this episode of the Post Christian Podcast, I have with me pastor and author Daniel M. How are you doing, Daniel?
Hey, it's great to be with you, Eric.
It is good to have you here. I am eager to learn more about what you're doing in your part of the world. You are a pastor in Edmonton, Canada, and it feels like every time I've been to Edmonton, it was the dead of winter. You guys have all of your conferences
I
in
know.
winter.
I know it makes no sense.
Well, in some ways it does because no one wants to be inside in the summer. They want to be
Yeah.
outside.
Yeah, I guess so.
But talk about being a pastor in Edmonton. This is you're in a country that in many ways has some Christian heritage, but very few people, believe the scriptures or trying to follow Jesus. What's it like being a pastor there?
Yeah, Edmonton, Canada, it's interesting because like the States, different regions have different perspectives politically. The spiritual climate would be different as well. So being up in Edmonton, it's fascinating because it is one of the Canada's fastest growing cities right now.
Oh,
Greater Edmonton's at 1.6 million, and in the next 20 or so years, they're expecting it to get to 2.3, 2.4 million.
wow.
So in the last 4 years, I think Edmonton grew by around 200,000 people.
Oh my
So people are
goodness.
moving to Edmonton left, right, and center from within Canada, from outside of Canada, partly because of the cost of living, the economy, jobs are plentiful here. So the only thing that you have to deal with is winter 5 months out of the year.
That's it. Yeah.
But if you can get past that, the summer's sun's up by 5, 6 a.m. and it goes down at 11 at night. So it's
Mm,
gorgeous.
that
Yeah.
is beautiful. I love it. Well, I'd love to hear just a little bit about what you're seeing God do. How are you reaching? How are you discipling in that environment?
hmm Yeah. This is something that I had been noticing pre-pandemic. And it was just this notion of, spiritually speaking, people being more open than I thought they were going to
Hmm,
be.
hmm.
And sometimes, depending on the inputs that we get, whether it's news or our particular echo chambers and our social media feeds and all of that, it's easy for some of us to get this mindset and get into this slump of thinking people aren't interested in Jesus, or
Hmm.
that people aren't interested in Christianity in the West. So over the last 70 years, there's been this sense of, okay, so what do we do, or what can we do to cause and create interest? And I feel like churches, and I was in the middle of that too, were very much trying to center their methodologies, center all that they do strategy wise around getting people interested. But the thing that I've been noticing over the last several years is we don't actually have to do that anymore, because I'm seeing the Holy Spirit create that interest in folks. So,
Hmm.
what does it look like for us as a church to begin receiving? Yes, continuing to do evangelism, outreach, discipleship, but actually have that shift in perspective.
Yeah, I love it. And I've seen that here, in
Mm-hmm.
Austin, we have not too long ago, a guy just kind of desperate and for help, for change, for
Yeah.
something new in his life, and just thought, well, maybe I should try a church,
Yes.
and he showed up, and
Yeah.
came up to the front. We prayed for him. He started going to recovery. He got baptized. I mean, it's people are wanting to encounter God,
Yes.
and
Yeah. I can't.
if you
I can't
create
tell you how
that,
many.
it happens.
I know. I can't tell you how many stories. Honestly, story after story after story in our context. Even this one guy who, what 2 decades hasn't been in church, moved to Edmonton a year ago, woke up just having this sense that he had to go to a church. So he looked up Catholic churches near me. Okay, Catholic. I'm not a pastor of a Catholic church,
No,
and we don't have
right.
Catholic in our SEO or any sort of SEM or anything like that. Nothing. And Beulah Alliance Church was the very first result
How
on
funny.
Google. And that is not, like, you cannot replicate that. It doesn't work. We've tried multiple devices. We're like, how is this working? Is someone paying for advertising targeting Catholic Church search results? And it's not. But Beulah was number one, and he came up. And it's hilarious because afterwards he was like, hey, this doesn't really feel like a Catholic church. And that weekend I was doing a first person narrative sermon. as one of John the Baptist's disciples, and
Very different.
I wasn't even wearing what I usually wear either. I was wearing Lululemon joggers, a shirt, just very, because I just wanted to be very different than how I would normally preach. And he was like, and the priest doesn't look very priestly. But
That is
these are the
remarkable.
sorts of stories, right? And that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing the Holy Spirit stir up interest in people's hearts.
Yeah. Well, I think your experience too in Vancouver and Ottawa, Montreal, Korea, Edmonton, and Nashville, like it's just, I love how you're describing, the importance of seeing what God is doing where you are
Yeah.
and being open to that. And I'm excited about your new book, The
Mm.
Discipleship Opportunity, leading a great commission church in a post-everything world. Talk a little bit about some of the insights in that book. Why should these church leaders, which by the way, we'll give several away for free to those who get my
Awesome.
newsletter. You can sign up at ericbryant.org, but talk about some of the insights that you share in this book.
Yeah. So as I was mentioning before about that key term, interest, for the last 70 years, the church growth movement has been such a dominant mode of thinking, and it's so shaped the way that we have strategized and do church and are leading, so much so that today there's so many things that church leaders are doing that they would not attribute to the church growth movement, because it's been such a part of the air that we breathe. So as I was researching and writing this book, I noticed that there were these two dominant assumptions that the church growth movement it's still influencing us today. And it's these assumptions of course, church, and of course, growth. And in these two assumptions, we are trying to actually not giving credit to the church growth movement, but we're actually perpetuating these models that the world that we are living in today is not the world that was. That all these principles, methods that it was written to a world that no longer exists today. So when you think about, here's a great example, and this is a scale that most church leaders are aware of, the angle scale. Right? And it's a scale of right to left or left to right, non-Christian to Christian. And there's this moment, right in the middle at 0 where someone makes a decision to follow Jesus. This would still be true, and I would still agree with it. But the interesting thing is our methods in our churches have been so either focused on getting non-Christians over the line, or either there have been church models that have so focused on the Christian side on discipling, and it's been either left or right. But if you think about what's happening, we talked about it earlier in the interview, the idea that the Holy Spirit is causing and creating interest. What would it look like if instead of either focusing our churches on reaching non-Christians or reaching Christians, what would it look like if we actually saw this as a quadrant? And the quadrant isn't so left non-Christians, right Christians, but there's actually the uninterested and the interested. And we actually saw these 4 parts where there are uninterested non-Christians who are the sleepers. And we saw a lot of them during the pandemic, before the pandemic, during the pandemic, right now, they just kind of dropped out of the radar, right? They're gone. They're asleep spiritually. And then we also have uninterested Christians, the consumers. And we also saw lots of those as well.
Yeah.
Right. But then what would it look like if we actually saw there's the interested non-Christians, the seekers, and the interested Christians, the disciples? What would it look like if we were actually to shift our ministry model and methodology to reach the interested and not worry about creating interest in people, but actually reaching, discipling, and preaching to those who are interested? That's the main premise of the book. And if we do that, that's, I believe, is our way to reach our post everything world.
I love that. And it's, echoes of Matthew 10, where Jesus sends them out and says, look for those persons of peace. If they're not interested, keep going.
Yeah.
What are some of the other insights? Because we are in a post everything world. And I love the subtitle of the book. How are you seeing discipleship with that framework there in Canada at your church, in your city? How are you seeing the interested non-Christians engage?
Yeah. So like I've seen on the mission field, and like I've seen when I've done ministry outside of Canada, the Holy Spirit is it's like Jesus, right? What Jesus said, that he would leave the 99 and go after the one. We're seeing that through the ministry of the Holy Spirit, and how the Spirit is prompting people's hearts, directing them, nudging them, creating a sense of discontent in life and in what they're pursuing. So as a church, what does it look like for us to disciple the disciples in our church to neighbor well?
Hmm.
And when it comes to both the disinterested and the uninterested non-Christians, the way that we reach them is primarily through the disciples in our context, where we're
Great.
not saying to our disciples, hey, so just come and we'll feed you. It's actually, hey, disciples, we're going to equip you. You are living where you're living, you're working, you're studying, you are in the context yet you're in because Christ wants to move in and through you to reach your neighbors, to reach everyone you live, work, study, and play with. So how do we equip them to neighbor well, to love well, to reach out well, to be invested? Because there's research, multiple research projects that actually show that non-Christians are open. The majority of non-Christians are open to having spiritual conversations with Christian friends, not with Christians, period, but with Christian friends.
Yeah, that's
And
good.
when we are investing and building into the relationships and just neighboring well, at Beulah, we differentiate neighboring and evangelism. It's the same thing, right? But essentially, because evangelism has this notion, right? It's, oh, I need to be an evangelist, or that's what the pastors do, or I can't be an evangelist, I can't evangelize. But when we start talking about neighboring, which is evangelism, it's just an easier way to get into it. We're like, no, but what does it look like to be a neighbor, a good neighbor? What does it look like to neighbor well? We're
Mhm.
actually helping people, and the disciples in our context begin evangelizing with those they live, work, study, and play with.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've seen that too in my own life. Even at Mosaic, I just started trying something different where, just asking a neighbor to tell me about their spiritual journey, and they didn't
Mhm.
mind sharing about it. And then I would ask, can I share about mine, and try to connect their story and mine, and
Yes,
and
100%.
then share with them about, how I found what it sounds like they're still looking for. Would you want what I've found? And it's really remarkable. I love how you're doing that. What are some other ways that you've seen? And it's funny, it's hard not to go back to the uninterested non-Christians,
Yeah.
or even the uninterested Christians, as you're kind of casting this vision of neighboring well.
Mhm.
Have you seen consumeristic Christians decide, what, I do want to be a disciple, I
Yeah.
do want to neighbor well? What's been the trick there?
Yeah. Early on in the research, I had this sense where I was like, oh, forget the consumers, let's just focus on the interested. And you can't really focus on the disinterested non-Christians because they're not here. Right. And to try to
Sure.
use Facebook ads to reach them and all that stuff is a little bit of a exercise in futility because they just don't care. But what
Right.
about the uninterested non-Christians, the consumers? They're the ones that send the angry emails, right? They're the ones that get upset
Yeah.
if you bring in a guest speaker that doesn't say the right thing. They're those ones. And at first I was like, oh, forget them. Just forget them, right? Don't worry about them. But as I continue to pastor here and as I continue to research and look into it, I was like, you know what? That's not if they're a part of the flock that God has entrusted to me to shepherd, then I can't really forget about them, right?
Yeah.
What does it look like to challenge them? And I came across this incredible quote where preaching is about disturbing the right, disturbing the comfortable
Yeah.
and comforting the disturbed.
That's really beautiful.
And when it comes to the consumers in our context, yeah, what does it look like? Not just to feed into what they want and to feed into their needs and to have this customer first centered approach to church ministry. And yes, we want to be incredibly welcoming. We want to be loving. But what would it look like to, instead of just trying to meet their needs, what would it look like to challenge them and to challenge where they're at and to actually create this sense of discontent and to create this sense of discomfort. I remember having lunch with one of our former elders, and he said to me, so quick story, Beulah is 102 years old. I've been the lead for the last 3 years. So I followed a 30-year lead pastor.
Wow.
And some people were like, you're just setting yourself up for failure, scapegoat, all that stuff. And but you know, that's a story, another story for another time. But I was sitting down with one of the elders, and he said, Daniel, I think I finally figured it out. I think I finally figured out why my friends don't like your preaching.
That's a fun conversation.
I was like, oh dear, what is he gonna say? Is he gonna say, yeah, so change this, change that, or this is why I don't like it either? I'm just, holding my breath, trying to figure out what he's about to say. And he said, Daniel, it's because you challenge us all the time. You're not just preaching and giving information. You're not just trying to cause us to think about something differently or lightly saying, yeah, but Jesus says this, and leading us to the cross in that way. He's like, you're challenging us. And I love how Steve Carter, he's my preaching coach, and one thing he said was, when you challenge, Daniel, it's like you're not only just bringing people to the edge of the cliff and saying, hey, here's how you parachute off of this. You're saying, let's go. And you're the first one running off that cliff with that parachute on your back, and you're like, let's go. And immediately I was like, and I didn't even think about the response when I heard him say that. I was like, good, because if I'm not challenging them, what am I doing? Right? I don't want to be here for just going to be giving talks that are interesting. I want to challenge us to be like Christ. And what's interesting is, okay, this is 3 years. So I've been back 5 years, been lead pastor for 3. Some of these folks that early on left the church once succession was announced, and as I entered into the lead role, many of them have returned.
Wow.
And they left because they were so uncomfortable. Right? But they're beginning to see the transformation that's happening in people's lives. They're beginning to see the work, not that I'm doing. I'm not giving myself that credit. But as I challenge our people and leave room for the Holy Spirit to move and the Holy Spirit to convict and drive people to himself, that's what I'm seeing with the consumers.
That's so beautiful. Well, your website, Daniel M, that's danielim.com, is filled with resources, the other books you've written. Thanks for sharing a little bit today. Keep up the great work, Daniel.
Thank you so much, Eric.